The film Backrooms creates horror in one of the most creative ways I've ever seen, using fourth dimensional theory as a metaphor for helping us understand some of the most terrifying and concerning aspects of psychotherapy. Now, I'm not trying to say that the film is saying, oh, psychotherapy is bad and don't go see a counselor, don't go see a therapist, but it is unpacking and using probably what we are all a little bit worried about when it comes to therapy to help terrify us. One of those things obviously is the concern that a therapist gets inside our head, what it means to be inside, to be in our back rooms. But the other is even a little bit deeper, which addresses the problem of, can psychotherapy both suggest that we're kind of a fundamental person, a fundamental self, kind of that there's a core person that we're trying to get at, created by our parents and the way we were raised and by our biology. It's just the way we're wired, while at the same time, therapy is trying to tell us, oh no, but you also can change. So that contradiction is there at the core of the film and shows us some of the most terrifying things we're really going to have to face if we dive into the back rooms. Okay, so what does any of this have to do with fourth dimensional theory? So fourth dimensional theory really is just a way of kind of unpacking something that is impossible for us to understand. A dimension is really just a way of describing something. Like you can think of, that they're a person of many dimensions. A dimension can be something like a color or a texture. But in the case of 4D theory, what we're talking about are spatial dimensions, things like height, length, and width. But fourth dimension would suggest that there's another spatial dimension. So here's what I mean. Okay, so to be really quick about it, here's just the basic idea. If you have no dimensions at all, you have a point, right? No length, no width, no height, no spatial dimensions. It's not occupying any space. If I double my points, now, okay, I am occupying one spatial dimension. I have length. If I double my points again, I am now occupying two spatial dimensions, right? I have my length and my width. If I double my points again, I now have the ability to access three spatial dimensions: our length, our width, and our height, right? So we have depth. Four-dimensional theory suggests that what if you could kind of no-clip into a fourth spatial dimension, which is going to be basically impossible for us to imagine because we're stuck with our 3D brains. But if you double the points again, and I'm not going to, for the sake of time, I'm not actually going to double all of them, but you'll get the basic gist, which you start getting something that looks a little bit like this, which is what you call a hypercube, which looks in one cross section of it like a cube within a cube. But that is just one cross section, and I'll explain what I mean by that in just a second. But the whole idea here is that there's a dimensionality, that there's a movement through space that we normally wouldn't have access to. You can think about it a bit like that kind of ant and tightrope idea that they gave us in Stranger Things, right? You have a tightrope, a person who's walking on that tightrope, well, they can only move in these two dimensions. So they might really feel like that's all the dimensions that there are. But the universe that they're actually a part of has way more dimensionality than that. There's this whole kind of 360 degrees around which you could rotate here that a little ant would be able to experience and occupy. So they would be able to move this way and this way. They'd be able to rotate around it. And so it would feel almost kind of like a magical imagining for this person here who can only move in these directions. What does it mean to even be able to explore these other dimensions? So part of what the Backrooms is doing very, very, very smartly is giving us the realization that dimensions doesn't necessarily mean being moved into just this different space. What it means is to kind of slide into a fourth dimensional space. Now, ways in which the movie presents itself with 4D theory stuff, with all of these different cross sections of dimensions or directions being presented all at the same time. You see things like lampposts that have kind of cut through four-way lampposts. You see coat racks that, again, they're kind of four-way. You can engage in north, south, east, and west. The very idea that you're going to see repeatedly of this steering wheel that you see on a ship suggests something like, oh, well, for an entity that can only move on the circular part, they might feel like time or space moves this way. But what if you could no-clip inside and then move out in another direction? Well, you would appear to disappear and then reappear somewhere else in space and time. So the film does this in part by giving us these still life people who you see are they seem almost kind of sliced up or repeated. And I want to suggest that that, in fact, is a way of taking cross sections. And cross sections are a way of understanding 4D theory. What I mean by that is the best way really for us to try and understand 4D theory at all is to think about 2D, to think about something that's 2D and what it would be like to be an entity that is in fact a 2D entity. All right, so let's imagine a creature that is a circle and it lives in its little 2D world, right? It's just two-dimensional. It doesn't have depth to it. So it has length and it has width. Now this 2D entity, when it encounters other shapes in the 2D world, well, from its perspective, it is not going to ever be able to experience all of this triangle at the same time. In fact, its experience of the triangle is going to be a line that it can kind of move around, and it realizes, oh, I can move in this different direction, and the line seems to have these different kind of qualities. It's never going to be able to experience this triangle all at once. It might be able to experience this edge and this edge, or this edge and this edge, but it's never going to be able to experience all three edges the way that you can. Now, a 3D entity like ourselves is not limited to be able to interact with this circle from these directions. We can interact with this circle right here. So let's say we wanted to do surgery on its little heart. Well, the triangle, let's say the surgeon would have to cut through and break into this circle in order to do surgery on its heart. But me, I can just, all right, fix it right up. There you go. Problem solved. And the circle would be completely flabbergasted, as if you could reach inside of it. What is psychotherapy other than an attempt to reach inside of someone without actually breaking them, without having to break through their body, break through their brain? This idea that you can step out into a fourth dimension and engage this person from a direction that they actually do not have access to. This is also what MRI machines do. So if you think of the fact that the film touches on MRIs, which provide us cross-sections of the human brain. Well, those are 2D representations, and if you take enough 2D representations, you can start imagining a 3D representation of the person. So the MRI is supposed to be able to see inside of you without breaking inside of you by giving a series of cross-sections so that we, because we cannot experience something 3D all at once visually, right? We have to experience in its pieces. Still life people look like if you took a bunch of cross sections of someone over time, kind of collapse them together. Oh, here's what you get. It's kind of like trying to describe a dog to someone who's never seen one and then having them draw it, right? That's the same idea. If you take a bunch of slices of someone over time, well, and put them all together, oh, this is what the person is like. And again, isn't that what psychotherapy does? Psychotherapy treats us like a bunch of cross-sections that can be used to explain the whole thing. Think of ideas like the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind being very present, the subconscious mind being a little bit underneath that, and then the unconscious mind being things like memory or the processes of which we're not aware. Well, in reality, the mind would be all three of those things happening at the same time. But because we can't understand them all at the same time, we create these cross sections that we use to help us imagine what this multi-dimensional mind thing really is like. So part of the terror that's being pushed on through the film is this problem of, can you really, through psychotherapy, get to know who someone really is just by a series of cross sections? Like, oh, well, we meet with you once a week, and each one of those little cross sections is a way of understanding the whole person. And what a perfect metaphor is this whole dog drawing analogy. You go into your therapist and you describe yourself. The therapist cannot actually see inside of you. They don't have that 4D access. So you describe who you are, your thoughts and your feelings. You maybe omit things. Maybe you fudge some other things. You make yourself sound a little bit better. You make yourself sound a little bit worse. And they, not ever seeing you as you are, then create an image for themselves of you that they present to you to help you understand you. So it's basically like trying to show the dog who's never seen a mirror, never been able to look at themselves, oh, here's what you look like, by having the dog describe themselves to you because you also can't see them either, and then you draw them. It's this massive kind of game of drawing telephone. And that's the terror there of psychotherapy. This realization that we go to the psychotherapist under the impression that they can really understand us and who we are, and they really can't. And one of the great things about the Backrooms is the realization that in dealing with four-dimensional theory, it's dealing with this ability to get in the inside and turning it to the outside. And it pushes on that a lot. One of the ways that fourth-dimensional theory pushes on this problem of the inside and the outside, just kind of like the steering wheel, the ship wheel example that we're talking about, but is also the idea that something that could go into the center of this circle, which the circle itself can't imagine if it's a 2D entity, well, you could go stand inside of it and look through the entity in a way that literally turns it from the inside out. And that is incredibly similar to the way that we see things like stop signs in the film. The tendency is to think of these kinds of things like, oh, it's like looking in a mirror that just switches left and right. But mirrors don't actually switch left and right the way that we think they do. They actually kind of play in a little bit of this fourth dimensionality by switching front and back. What do I mean by that? What I mean is if you're standing in front of a mirror, if you hold your hand up, right, your mirror image is going to point in the same direction. Same thing if you go this way, if you point that way, if you point down, right? All of those, the mirror's going to do the same thing. But if you point this way, now all of a sudden, your mirror image is pointing the opposite direction, because what mirrors actually do is bring the back part as if you could put like a string through me and pop me from the inside out. Here's an example that we can give. When you see the stop signs in the film, well, let's say I write the word stop here. Well, we're not actually in a mirror just writing the word backwards, right? Which would look like this, right? It would just be pots. That's not what actually happens. Bobby says pots, but what Bobby actually sees, if we just take it and rotate it, is this, which means that what you're actually doing is you are seeing through the back side of the stop sign, as if you were on the other side of it, as if you're in the inside of it looking out. And we see that mirrored by the presentation of the storefront of Captain Clark's. There's a point when we see it when it's in the back rooms and it's as if you're outside of it, but the imagery that's normally kind of on the left is on the right, but it's not because they switch left and right. It's actually because it's as if you could take Captain Clark's and push the inside of it all the way to the outside of it and inverted it from the inside out. What would happen is the same thing as you would see with the stop sign. So I know you can already see where I'm going with this, with all the talk about the inside and outside. The whole film literally plays with the problem of people who are stuck literally on the inside, right? Mary is stuck inside. Clark is also stuck inside. His wife complains that he's at work too much. Where do we see him living? He literally lives at his furniture store. He is sleeping there. Mary, I think we have really good reason to believe that as a therapist, she probably has her office in her home, meaning that she does not have to travel outside to go to work. She's under the impression that she has made this change. She has now escaped the prison basically that her mother created for her. But in reality, not so much. She doesn't have to go very far. And she takes the outside with her by taking that little handprint. So even when she's inside, she gets to feel like, oh, no, but I have been outside. I've engaged in the outside. I go outside. In a lot of ways, she never really leaves. And Clark certainly never leaves either. He just goes deeper inside. He goes into the back rooms, which is a psychoanalytic concept. Okay, let's dive deeper into who you really are so that we can make change. So we have all of these problems of the inside and the outside, and this idea of people thinking that they've moved to the outside when in reality they haven't. They're just stuck in the loops. They're just looking through the windows. Notice that Clark's back room has no windows. He doesn't want to see outside. Now, that doesn't mean that the back rooms themselves don't have windows, because his employee, when she's stuck in there, Kat, she says that she can see him. He's just seeing a wall, which would mean that there are spaces that can be seen through, like windows. But in his rendering, as an architect, his construction, his experience of the back rooms has no windows other than one that he draws in that weird little mural that he makes. Notice that that mural touches on the idea of the fourth dimensional stuff that we're talking about. It literally writes the here and now is a two-way street, playing with this idea that the present can be approached from multiple directions. If you freeze yourself, if you decide you don't want to change, just like Clark does, okay, well, you freeze that one aspect of yourself. And that's the only aspect that is known, the only cross-section that is available to us. So Clark, in his decision to not change, at the same time, you see him say something that is another clear contradiction. Wouldn't it be nice if we could feel nothing? Wouldn't that feel good? So he literally says, wouldn't it feel good if you could feel nothing? But if you could feel nothing, it wouldn't be able to feel good because you would be feeling nothing at all. So he's envisioning a world in which he could exist like this, like the still lives. When he says, oh, the best part about them is you can eat them, and then he eats himself. What is he doing other than imagining himself as a still life, thinking about how great, wouldn't it be great like that, to be able to be consumed and to consume without any pain, without any experience, without any change. And oh my goodness, how perfectly does that capture the problem of four-dimensional theory as well? Because in 4D theory, the whole idea that time reflects change is challenged. If you look at something like a shadow is 2D. It's basically the closest we can get to something that actually doesn't have depth. Imagine holding something like, well, really any object, like a cube in the sun, so it's projecting a shadow. As you move the cube around, the shadow is going to seem to kind of morph and change. But in reality, it hasn't changed at all as far as the object that casts the shadow. All that's happened is it's moved. So if we think about something like the fourth dimension as space and time in kind of this way that's connected that we can't really understand, well, time wouldn't really be things changing. Time would be things moving, but because we're limited in our perspective, we're seeing them change. And isn't that the horror that's at the core of our worry about psychotherapy? That we would never be able to actually change. That we're moving, we're changing perspectives, but we ourselves never change. That's both the promise and the terror of psychotherapy. One of the fundamental terrors of psychotherapy that the film plays with is this problem of, okay, so the therapist gets inside of us and realizes, no, you really can't change. And the really terrifying aspect of that is the realization that we might be a little worried that maybe that's what we really want. That like Clark, that the therapist is going to kind of get in there and go look around from the inside out and be like, oh, not only can't you change, but you never really wanted to in the first place. One way of looking at this is thinking about a 3D object moving through a 2D space. So if I have, let's imagine a 2D space, right? We have the length and the width, and we imagine there's no depth here at all. Well, if there's a creature living here on this space and a 3D object were to pass through that space, what would the 2D entity experience? Well, the 2D entity would only see a point when it's just touching the plane, right? And remember, the 2D entity can't look at it from here. The 2D entity has to look at it as if it's coming from just this one singular point. As it moves through it, what the 2D entity sees is a line being created. The line gets longer and longer and longer and longer and longer, then shorter and shorter and shorter. It becomes a point again and disappears. Birth, growth, and death. So one way of looking at this kind of 4D temporal theory is that us from going birth to death isn't an actual change. It's just our perception of the whole thing moving, the whole thing moving through 4D space that we can't actually perceive and imagine. Just like the 2D entity would only see a line growing and then disappearing, we see the person coming into existence, growing and disappearing. Now, it's kind of a loose metaphor, but I think you get the general idea of where I'm going, as this is a huge problem for psychotherapy, that really all I'm doing is rotating you around in, by the way, this incredibly limited way. So the whole film, I don't think, is saying that psychotherapy can't work, that seeing a therapist can't work, but that at its core, we are kind of like subconsciously terrorized by the possibility that it could make us change. Like Clark, we don't really want to. So psychotherapy promises, no. You kind of are who you are. Like, look, you can take the Myers-Briggs. You can find out who you are through engrams. Like a lot of therapists will kind of give you this test. Okay, this is who you are. And now we can work with this. So don't worry. I'm not going to change you fundamentally. But at the same time, I promise that you can change, that you can be happier, that you can be well, that you don't have to suffer in these ways. So it's giving us these promises that somewhere in the back of our head, we know that those two promises cannot be true at the same time. We see the therapist have to experience that, realizing that she can't help anyone and thusly, very possibly, can't help herself, which is why at the end of the film, we see her kind of stuck like a still life, but also like a client in therapy who can't really grow or change. They're just all of themselves, all of the cross sections of themselves kind of glued together, unable to really grow or maneuver through the world. And then we get to feel like the therapist who gets to watch all of this and go, oh, wow, look at the way Clark doesn't realize this. And look at the way that Mary's finally coming to realize this. One of the most powerful realizations through the film is the realization that you cannot escape the backrooms because you were never not in the backrooms. Think about things like in the furniture store, the backrooms is able to impact the lighting, causing the lights to kind of flicker. Think about the fact that those switches in the fuse box just kind of appear and don't work there. Isn't that exactly the way fuses would work in the back rooms? Clark is already in the back rooms in the same way that he's never been able to actually leave his trauma, and he's never actually been able to leave the furniture store, right? He's stuck there metaphorically through his work life, just like Mary has never really been able to leave her childhood. She's never been able to escape the trauma of her mother, and she wasn't able to leave her house, and now she doesn't really leave her house because her job is probably located in her house. The back rooms were always where we were, which is a four-dimensional realization. Like Mary, think that we're on the outside looking in. And eventually, if we think about it, start to realize, oh, no, we are actually on the inside looking out. I never actually left that space is basically what Mary realizes when she says she can't help someone. She's always been there. She can't fix it for her mother. And the worry is would she even be able to fix it for herself? Well, we in the theater are thinking that we're the outside looking in, but the credits say, no. You are actually inside the movie looking out. You're looking at the drawing of yourself and your experience. And I love that at the very end of the film, it challenges that as well. Because when you get to the credits, which are technically outside of the film, where we get to go, oh, wow, I watched that movie. I was outside of it. I'm an external observer. The credits have that kind of double facing aspect to them, which could just be a fun play off of the way that they're engaging in that kind of fourth dimensional cutaway and gluing things together. But another way of looking at it is you, the viewer, think that you were outside of this, but you are inside of it. You think that you're on the outside looking in, but really you are as inside as all of the rest of us are, looking out, commenting on, oh, wow, look at these people not be able to realize these things about themselves. So as you leave the theater and the credits are rolling, you get to go, oh, this is outside of the film. But no, in reality, the film's never actually ended because the back rooms would be everywhere. In other words, in a 4D theoretical world, you don't actually travel from one dimension to another. You just have the ability to move through the universe, sometimes through different directions. But the universe itself remains the same. So the reason why the back rooms are such a problem and appearing more and more for the people in the film is because the back rooms are always where you are. Even in the real world, it's still just the back rooms, just a particular perspective or a particular direction of being able to move through the back rooms. Okay, so if you got to the end of this, thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. It's a great way to kind of help me grow the channel. Share it with somebody else if you think it's something that they might enjoy as well. And I really appreciate you. I hope you have a wonderful day.